Evan mentioned, Nancy Wilcox is joining me in this meeting this evening, and we will be presenting to you the Homeless 101 training, which we have been doing the rounds throughout the city and presenting to various commissioners or commissions. Nancy works with the South Bay Coalition to End Homelessness since 2013. In her capacity, she is the coalition's co-chair, where she assists actually the city and is a great partner and asset to the city of Torrance, where she has assisted us and in letting us inform ourselves on how and what homelessness looks like in Torrance. She is a very good friend of myself and my colleague Viet Huang, who is the deputy city manager and also works in everything homelessness here for the city. So let me start sharing the screen with your honorable body. As mentioned, we will be presenting to your honorable body on what homelessness is, or Homelessness 101. Nancy will do the first portion of the slides, and I will follow up with the last portion of the few slides. Thank you. And with that, Nancy.
Okay. Thank you so much, Zolma. If you can go to the next slide, please. And I wanted to also thank you for, for inviting us to give kind of just so much a training is so much more like an awareness of different aspects of homelessness. And I wanted to just add on there that I've been a proud Torrance resident for over 40 years now. So I've used a lot of the library facilities. As our son, who's now 32, as he was growing up, I would spend many a day down at the library. So I really appreciate all the work that you do overseeing the library system. So anyway, let me jump right into this. As Zolma mentioned, we're going to be going over just very quickly just what homelessness looks like in the city of Torrance, just to give you a little bit of kind of overall context. I'm sure you hear some of the big numbers about Los Angeles County and so forth, but I want to break it down a little bit more for the city of Torrance. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over just kind of dispelling some commonly held myths that people have about homelessness. And then I'll jump into the type of services that are available and how to refer people to those services. And then, as Zolma mentioned, I'm going to hand it back over to her, and she's going to give you some stories and tell you more specifically about what the city of Torrance is doing, and tell you about some participant stories. Next slide, please. Actually, you can go to the next two slides. Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. So every year we conduct the annual homeless count. It's held at the end of January, and we did hold one in 2022, but the results will not be published yet until the summer. So I'm going to be reporting on the findings from 2020. And of course, we had to kind of skip that intermittent year 2021 because of COVID. So again, the stats I'm going to give you are a couple years old, but sit tight and you'll get those new results in probably summer timeframe. I'm sure you'll be hearing about that. But based on the 2020 homeless count in the city of Torrance, there were over 300 people who are experiencing homelessness. And of that, I'm going to break it down a little bit. And there were about 270 people living unsheltered. And those are folks who are living like in our parks. You see a gentleman here in the picture, people who are in tents, and also in vehicles. And Torrance actually has a very high percentage of people experiencing homelessness that do live in vehicles. About 70%, or 195 people were living in vehicles when we did the count in 2020. Next slide, please. And then, next slide, thank you. So before I jump into some of the commonly held myths, I just have a couple of slides that kind of give some very overarching, very generalized reasons for why people become homeless. This first one shows you more kind of systemic or societal change reasons why people become homeless. And I really want to point out that, as many of you know, that there's just a very severe shortage of, affordable housing. Wages just haven't kept up with rising rents and cost of living. You'll see the other items here as well. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of kind of implicit bias and discrimination that we unfortunately have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Next slide, please. And then this slide shows you kind of more individualized or personal reasons why people fall into homelessness. Again, it has to do with economic reasons. Again, unfortunately, we do have people, men and women, who have experienced domestic violence, and just the trauma of that has really caused them to fall into homelessness. And you'll see a lot of the other reasons here too. The age that for a lot of our youth, that what we call youth, that would be young adults ages 18 to 24. A lot of them fall into homelessness because they kind of age out of the foster care system. Many of you probably are aware that once a person turns 18, that they're no longer available for those services. So they have to kind of enter another set of countywide services. And sometimes that transition is very difficult for these young people. And they unfortunately do fall into homelessness. Yeah. Next slide, please. So next slide. I'm just going to go over a few kind of commonly held myths about why people fall into homelessness. And, the first one is one that we hear time and time again. And that is that, everyone experiencing homelessness has a mental illness, or maybe they're alcoholics, or they take, or they abuse drugs. And from this annual homeless count that I mentioned, where we get our statistics, we also get a lot of demographic and information as well. And we know consistently year after year with that homeless count, we know that the number of people who do have a mental illness or who have a substance use disorder, it's about 25 to 30% of the overall population. So while this is a significant number, and I don't want to minimize that number, clearly 60, 70% of the people do not have one of these conditions. Next slide, please. And the next myth that we talk about, or that we hear a lot about, is that people who are homeless are just kind of lazy, or they don't want to get a job, they want to live on the government. It's kind of a lifestyle type situation for them. And we also know that just isn't true. Again, many people who are experiencing homelessness do have employment, and they just don't make enough to kind of make ends meet. And I wanted to point out this note here that's shown in red. So about 60% of the people who fall into homelessness do so because of economic reasons, and they just don't have financial hardships. Next slide, please. So this last myth I'm going to go over is that some people think that because we don't find families with minor age children, that there just aren't families of that nature who are experiencing homelessness. And unfortunately, we know that also is not true. And one thing I wanted to kind of highlight that's shown here kind of on this orange strip down below is that every school district needs to report to the county system how many how many students are experiencing homelessness. Now, they fall under kind of a broader range of what they consider homeless, because they also include people who are kind of doubled up or couch surfing, which our homeless count numbers do not include that category of people. So again, their numbers are broader. But even with that, we know TUSD consistently reports about 200 students who are experiencing homelessness. And if anything, that's probably an undercount, because the way that the school district receives those statistics is that the families kind of self-report. So as you can imagine, sometimes when people get to be, especially in their teenage years, they're just very embarrassed or ashamed to talk to maybe their high school counselors or their teachers about their living situation. So we really feel that people at that age range go uncounted, unfortunately. So before I leave this slide, I do want to kind of point out this picture that we have here. This is the staff of Harbor Interfaith Services, and it was obviously taken before the pandemic a few years ago, but it has a lot of the staff who do work with the family system. And I think I should have photoshopped out the two young children that are kind of in the middle of that picture. But if you could imagine this picture without them, and if I were to ask you, point out the family, point out the mom and dad that who were experiencing homelessness prior to getting support from Harbor Interfaith, I think you'd really have a hard time finding them and picking them out because they don't fit this kind of stereotypical view that most folks have, that, kind of how the media portrays them. There might be some people maybe around the library I know who might be there kind of on a consistent basis that don't look like this, but this is really the view of what most people who are experiencing homelessness look like. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go over these. I know that Zoma will be giving you a copy of this briefing, so you'll have a chance to kind of look at it when you have a little bit more time. But there were a lot of other myths, the misconceptions that people have, and just in the interest of time, we just kind of consolidated onto one chart right there. So next slide, please. I'm going to just pause here for just a moment. Do you have any kind of clarifying questions about anything that I went over so far? Just kind of quick questions. I know that there'll be time at the end for more discussion, question and answer, but anything I can clarify? I know I'm going to do a lot of material very quickly.
Good for me so far. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Everything is so good. So good.
Okay. Thank you. I know, but again, I've given this briefing other times, and sometimes I can take like up to an hour giving it. So again, just to be respectful of all of your time, Zolma and I are going through this rather quickly, like I say. Anyway, next slide, please. So let me jump in then to the services that are available, and then how to connect people to them. And as this slide shows, Torrance is actually blessed with not just the publicly funded services, but also a lot of privately held services that are offered, and especially through the faith community. This is a picture of Walter United Methodist, and I know that there's several other churches within the Torrance area that do supply either a hot meal, or Walteria actually used to have a sit-down hot meal before the pandemic, and of course they've had to kind of convert to a kind of a grab-and-go type meal that they have on Saturdays. So again, we're very blessed to have organizations within the city that do provide services like that. Next slide, please. So, but the main system that I wanted to talk about is one that you might hear about. It's called a Coordinated Entry System, or CES. And under the CES umbrella, it provides just a plethora of services, from homeless prevention all the way to street outreach, the shelter system, or interim housing, we call it. There's also recovery programs for people who do have a substance use disorder, and of course the housing, permanent housing. And then across all of those different services, there's a deep case management that goes with all of those. And again, those are all funded partly through that Measure H 4% sales tax, but there's also a tremendous amount of funding coming in from the federal government, especially now because of the COVID funds, CARES Act funds. They're also being utilized to help people experiencing homelessness. And because CES is such a large kind of a framework, it's kind of broken out into separate systems for families with minority children, for transitional age youth, and then the rest are for individuals. But even within individuals who are 24 or over, there's also some specialized services for senior citizens. Next slide, please. So one of the main ways that people on this commission, the general public, and city employees, and so forth, what you could do to really help and be a part of this, part of the solution, is whenever you see people experiencing homelessness, if you could report that through a county-wide portal called LA-HOP, and just stands for homereachoutreachportal.org. And you go online at their website. You can also call 211 if you don't have access, so ready access to a computer to be able to input the findings. Next slide, please. And when you call LA-HOP.org, what happens is that kind of triggers a street outreach team to go out to the location that you've mentioned, and they will try and connect with that person or with that family or encampment or whatever it is that you're reporting, and they will try and establish kind of a relationship with them. And it's through that relationship and trust building that ultimately we find that people will accept services. And Soma will give you some examples of how that's happened in Torrance. But a little bit more about LA HOP. So they will try and go out 2 or 3 times to the location that you provided on this portal. And if you do kind of optionally report or put in your contact information, if they are having a little bit of difficulty finding that person, they may reach out to you and just say, hey, we went out to the library, we couldn't find that person. Have you seen them recently? Maybe they have different type of clothing, or, maybe you've seen them some other place, and they'll ask for some additional information and we'll try and find that person. Okay. Next slide, please. So one of the things that you can do certainly is, again, just to encourage the use of LA HOP. We do I mentioned this coordinated entry system. The way that people get connected is not just through LA HOP, but also through 211, especially for families with minor age children. The Social Services Commission, a few years ago, they developed this great resource card that you see over here on the left. It's a wallet-sized card, and it just has, rather than giving like dozens and dozens of referrals, they wanted to keep it a little bit simpler and more straightforward. So when you do see people, families, or maybe you see a veteran experiencing homelessness, there's specific contact information that they've provided here. And there's also one for anyone that you encounter who might be fleeing a domestic violence situation. And of course, all of these numbers are great. But if you ever do see someone who has like an immediate health concern, or if you see any criminal activity occurring, then of course we want you to call 911 instead. Next slide, please. And that was actually the end of my portion. So again, if you have any clarifying questions, I can take those. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Zulma.
Quick question.
Yes.
Hi. Regarding LA HOP, how does that work? Is there one person or several people assigned to one geographic
Sure.
locale?
Great question. One of the great things about this portal is that there are many outreach workers checking out areas within the whole South Bay. And there's some generals, so we call them, and there's some specialized teams. So if you put on there that you see someone and they have clear mental health problems, please indicate that on the LA HOP. And all of these requests go to, it's called the Regional Outreach Coordinator, who is staffed out of Harbor Interfaith Services, because they're kind of our lead for our coordinated entry system. That person then takes all of the requests and then basically assigns them. It's kind of like a little dispatch type, but he does a lot more than that, but, looks at the request. And they also, this person will also have good information in terms of, hey, 5 people have already made a request or submitted information on the same person. But with that, but it's great about the portal is that in Torrance, they will probably send out, you'll hear about a woman named Valerie, who's our dedicated outreach worker. She might particularly get that assignment, or there are some certain teams that do focus more on the city of Torrance, and they'll more than likely send out that team because, again, they might be familiar with this, certainly with the city, as well as some people who are already living on the streets. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, if there's no other questions, or we can save them all to the end. If you're thinking about things, I know I went through a lot of material. I'll just hand it over to Zulma.
Hi, I have one question, Commissioner Javed. So when the team goes out and they respond to a call, and I'm glad that there's a record of like multiple calls, because it's nice to know that somebody, for whatever reason, doesn't want the help. But how does the team actually approach the person when they could be armed, or just for their safety? And then and I mean, like, for example, too, like, I'm sure the library and everyone's on top of it, but sometimes they're just so close to the patrons walking back and forth, and just it could be a split second where they just want to react. And so what does your team or that team do to have that dialogue safely.
Sure. Sure. And actually, Zolma could probably tell you a lot more because she's been on ride-alongs with Valerie. But in general, all of these outreach workers are very well trained. So one of the first things that they will assess is just their own safety and the safety of the situation. So with that in mind, they won't approach someone that they feel is a danger to themselves and or possibly to them. And if that's the case, then they will just, very discreetly try to still talk to the person. But every situation is different. So what I tell you isn't necessarily what's done every time, but in general, they will assess the situation. And please rest assured that if they do feel that there's any safety issues, that they will get the police, typically the police involved. But again, just it's on a case by case basis. But I do want to mention though that the very vast majority of people, again, I'll leave it to Zolma to talk about that because she has been working very closely with Valerie. Most of the people who are experiencing homelessness, they are not dangerous. And you just, so the outreach work team can approach them. And, again, they've just been trained on how to do this in a very safe way, a very disarming way. So, and what as I mentioned, one of the things that we find is that people rarely, if ever, will want to talk to an outreach worker the very first time that they're approached. But it's after consistently going up to them like week after week, or maybe every few days, or again, whatever the situation calls for, that the person experiencing homelessness will eventually kind of let their guard down, if you will, and start to share their stories and open up so that we can provide help with them. So I don't know if that answered your question. And again, maybe I'll let Zolma answer a little bit more when she gives a little bit more for maybe some of the client stories.
Thank you, Nancy. If I may just add, Commissioner, that is a great question. And Nancy is correct. So far in the 1 year that I've been out in the streets with Valerie Hernandez, the outreach worker, we haven't seen anybody yet that's going to cause harm to the community. The majority of the time is they cause harm to themselves. When that does happen, we do get Torrance PD involved because the Torrance Police Department does have a mental evaluation team that can be sent out. So when we feel that that person is in danger of causing harm to themselves, we do call Torrance PD. And at the same time, the LA HOP team is a group of trained individuals that's LA County Department of Mental Health person, and the outreach worker, somebody that is specialized in substance abuse. So it's a few individuals with specialized services that go and outreach that one person that the LA HOP was submitted for. So it's pretty much a team effort, and we do pretty much access all services available to the city, especially when somebody's trying to cause harm to themselves. Hopefully that answered your question. Thank you, Nancy. And now moving on to the portion of my presentation. If your honorable body has not been listening to the meetings, to the mayor and council to the city council meetings since last June, where Viet and myself have been a little bit active in giving council updates on what they want to see with the city addressing homelessness in the city of Torrance. I will give you a quick overview on what we've been doing for the past year, or since June of last year. Since the inception of the Social Services Commission in 2016, that body has been responsible for various elements here in the city. They address concerns regarding to veterans, homeless population, adults with developmental disabilities, and children with special needs. But being that the nature of the homelessness topic has been huge, not just here in the city, but throughout the region, the commission that has been very busy addressing all homeless concerns as it relates to the city of Torrance. On this slide, you can see that the commission holds various events. The reason why they hold these events is because a lot of the community members have come to the commission and asked, not just the commission, but the city, how can we help? How can we get involved? And some of these events are are in nature community events and are ran by the community, successfully ran by the community and overseen by the commission that addresses or assists the various agencies that help homelessness here in the city of Torrance. One of the major projects or tasks that Nancy assisted the commission earlier this year was the homelessness count, where community members come at nighttime and hold the count. Nancy oversaw the count this year. She held various trainings. Because of COVID, the count hadn't been held in the past 2 years. So this is the first year that it was held a point-in count in person. So it was a very successful event. A lot of community members came and assisted with the count. Another one of the commission's events that they host is the toiletry drive, which supports local shelters or agencies, nonprofit agencies that service the homeless population. One of those homeless agencies is Harbor Interfaith, which Nancy mentioned. Valerie Hernandez works for Harbor Interfaith, and it has a 18-month contract here with the city of Torrance. So she's strictly dedicated to everybody experiencing homelessness here in the city of Torrance. The Social Services Commission also hosts a school supply drive, which takes place in the month of July through the month of August. And this drive is to assist families and students in the TUSD district that are experiencing homelessness and cannot afford supplies. And TUSD makes it in a dignified way where they we deliver all the items to them, and they do like a little store type of thing where they invite all the students that are experiencing homelessness to pretty much shop for the items that they need for the school year. That way they're not embarrassed or ashamed of people knowing that they're experiencing homelessness. Another important event is the annual Veterans Appreciation Event and Resource Fair, which in the past 2 years it has been held virtually because of the pandemic. So this year the commission is looking to host it a few months earlier than Veterans Day, which will be in October. The reason being is what we've noticed in the past few years during the pandemic is during the winter season, that's when we get a surge. So we figure, why don't we host the event earlier, instead of waiting till a COVID surge happens again. So that event is going to take place in October this year. And all this information that Nancy and I are sharing is on the city's homelessness website. And as I mentioned, since June of last year, Viet Hong, he's in a different meeting this evening. We've been working on homelessness for a year now. So Mayor and Council in June of last year approved staff to subcontract a dedicated outreach worker, like Nancy mentioned. Her name is Valerie Hernandez, which was an 18-month contract. And just recently, Mayor and Council approved to obtain an extension on Valerie. So we are looking to bringing her back and extending that same contract for an additional 12 months. And we are really looking forward to that. Another approval from Mayor and Council as of last year was to approve the homelessness plan. And thank you to Nancy Wilcox in this meeting. She was very instrumental in developing the city's homelessness plan, which is pretty much a roadmap for the city to use as guidance in how to address homelessness. In addition to the homelessness plan, Mayor and Council approved a 40-unit temporary program, or as many of you have seen, tiny homes, for individuals or couples that are experiencing homelessness here in the city of Torrance. That temporary 40-unit program will be coupled with wraparound services. Also, since last year, the city of Torrance has a homeless response team, which is a multidisciplinary team that consists of various departments here in the city that address homeless encampments that have an effect on businesses and community members. And as I mentioned earlier, in my answer to Commissioner Javid, Torrance PD has the TMET team. So Torrance Police Department has been the backbone to homelessness since way before I even started working on homelessness. They've been working on homelessness for quite some time. So they've been doing this for a long period of time. And that's why they have a full-time mental evaluation team, because they have been the primary resource in the past, but now we coordinate with Valerie on those efforts. Here is the temporary housing that will be coming to the city, hopefully in summer of this year. It will be 40 units with round-the-clock security, 24/7. It will include case management, and the reason for this temporary housing is to provide housing stability to the clients that Valerie has been working with. Not just that, it will assist people with obtaining life skills that they will need down the road to maintain or to obtain permanent housing. So the main goal of these temporary units is for somebody to come in, obtain all those wraparound housing with the ending goal of getting permanent housing. Does anybody have any questions?
Where will the house be located?
The temporary housing will be located, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Torrance Police Department. Behind there is an area where there's pretty much like a vacant parking lot between Torrance PD and the LA County Superior Court. So the area is there, the construction has begun, and we're looking to erect those units early summer of this year.
So the land belongs to the city of Torrance.
Correct. Yes. Commissioner O'Reilly?
So the photograph shows two people in one of those small homes. It isn't the plan for the city of Torrance to have one person per home?
That is correct, Commissioner. So yes, the unit does house two individuals, but because of COVID, we're only going to house one person per unit. And it was also advised to us by the expert that is not necessarily a good idea to house two people that have been fending for themselves all this time, and now you're grouping them together in a small space. So there's various reasons on why we're only going to house one person per unit, but it does eventually house two individuals. Unless it's a couple or they state to us, hey, we want to be housed together, then that would be only exception of getting housed two per unit. I saw another commissioner that had a question.
Yes, Commissioner Piotrowski. Excuse me, regarding the Torrance Homelessness Response Team, can you tell me how many members are on this team and how active are they, and like how closely they work with Valerie?
So the members of the unit pretty much fluctuate because it's not based by members, it's based by departments. So it's the community development department, the CDD department, the Parks and Recs. John LaRock is part of this team. So Torrance PD, and yes, we work with Valerie to address any homeless concerns or large encampments here in the city. And we meet once a month. Great question. So moving on to my next slide. So as Nancy mentioned, homelessness or homeless cases have increased in the past year, but a lot of them has been because of the pandemic, and no case is exactly the same. Recently, we have seen a lot of people experiencing homelessness due to loss of jobs, loss of a family member, or domestic violence, or because majority of them, because of COVID, their hours were reduced, so they could no longer afford their lease. they couldn't no longer afford a home that they purchased before the pandemic. So it has a lot of factors on somebody experiencing homelessness that we've seen in the past year at least. So this is a story that Valerie and I assisted a mother and daughter. And the reason why I'm going to say mother and daughter is because we want to maintain the confidentiality of Valerie's clients. So the mother and daughter were living with the mother's grandfather in a leased apartment here in the city of Torrance. Once the mother's father passed away, they were kicked out of the unit because they were not on the lease. So they were just living with the grandfather. The mother had a job, but once they got kicked out of their apartment unit after the grandfather passed away, they were living in a motel. They did contact Harbor Interfaith Services, which is the agency that Valerie works for. Harbor then referred them to Valerie because they were based here in the city of Torrance, and Valerie enrolled them in her program and connected them with Rapid Rehousing, where they were permanently housed within a few months, thanks to Valerie's efforts and the efforts of the mother and the daughter, and the fact that they had their documents, they had a job, made it a little bit more easier for Valerie to access the rapid rehousing resource. Eventually, they did secure a one-bedroom apartment. The mother, instead of having a part-time job, did obtain a full-time job, and she continues to receive case management. Also, the daughter attended El Camino College, where she graduated, and a good thing is that they're still permanently housed. So Valerie will check in on them every so often, but they do have a case manager assigned to them. On this story, we're going to refer to this person as John. John was an individual that was referred to the city by the Torrance courts. John called the city manager's office asking for resources for homelessness. He stated to me that he had been going through a divorce, and the judge told him to come here to City Hall and that we would connect him with homeless resources. So because of his divorce, he was left unhoused, and I connected him with Valerie, and he was matched to, after Valerie doing an assessment on his case, Valerie connected him with an emergency housing voucher, which the city of Torrance received 33 of those vouchers last year. So Valerie connected him with one of those vouchers, and within 3 months, with a collaborative effort of the city of Torrance housing department, he found an apartment here in the city, went through the whole process, filled out all the paperwork, stayed in contact with Valerie all the time, and eventually got permanently housed. We did follow up with him like 2 months ago. He's doing great. He's a retired man, and he has a daughter that attends a Torrance school. So he was very happy and very appreciative of Valerie's efforts. So what we've learned from being out doing outreach with Valerie, that building trust takes time. Even though she will visit a person first time around, it takes more than one time to establish that trust, or at least connect with that person. Initially, she doesn't conduct an assessment of the case or the person because there's no trust. So that means the person might not be truthful on their story, might not be truthful on the services that they need. So it is really important to establish that trust with the client. So therefore, the solutions can be customized to that individual. And this concludes our presentation. I will take additional questions if your honorable body has any more questions for us. Oh, you guys are a great group. But just so you know, we will send these slides to Evan so he can distribute to you guys. My email is at the end of this slideshow. you can contact me or my colleague, Viet Wong. We are more than happy to answer any questions if any more questions arise. Yes, Commissioner Riley.
I just want to say thank you. I thought this was a nice comprehensive set of information and referral. So thank you for this.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. We really do appreciate it.
Okay.
Yes, Commissioner Petrosky.
Yes, I'd also like to thank you. This is very informative, and I really appreciate this as a commissioner and a Torrance resident. But quick question, has the person experiencing homelessness outside the main branch of the Torrance Library, has that person refused help, or are they willing to get help, or I'm not sure the status of that?
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt if you don't mind. A lot of that is sensitive and a little confidential. So I'm not sure how much Zelma or staff is able to talk about it. So let me just preface that, and then Zelma, I'll let you answer.
Thank you, Nancy. That is correct, Commissioner, because it is confidential information. I'm just going to keep it vague and let you know that we are working with that person. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But yes, we are very well aware of him.
Great, thank you.
Sure,
Okay.
no problem.
Thank you, Commissioner. I noticed that there was a question in the chat from several minutes ago, asking about families and how many of the Torrance families. How many of the Torrance homeless count includes families. So we don't actually know that at a city level, but what I can tell you is that the demographic information that that we garner from the homeless count, which is put out by the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, we do have age statistics in broad categories, but it's more for the regional. So I can tell you for the South Bay region as a whole, about 12% of the people throughout the region are unfortunately minor age children. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a one-to-one, that 12% of Torrance, numbers also kind of reflect that. But it's just kind of a general guideline that we can give you.
And at the same time, Commissioners, Valerie Hernandez only works with adult individuals. So she doesn't work with families because there is a specialized outreach program for families, and there is more intense. And Valerie's not specialized in families. So when her and I do interact with a family experiencing homelessness, we do connect them with those services for families, specialized for families. So it's unfortunate Valerie cannot assist the family, but we do connect those families with the resources. So they're not just left out in the cold. We do value all of Valerie's efforts, and we also do connect families with the resources that they do need. Any other questions?
Yes, this is Commissioner Javed. I had one question. First of all, thank you for everything that this program does to, just overall just create a better environment. But how many, or just maybe even a percentage of people that need this assistance that are turned away or, not able to.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, you got cut off. I think she froze.
Yeah. Commissioner Javed, if you would like to enter your question in chat, I can read it aloud for the recording. Okay, I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah, I don't.
Should I try it again? Was it?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so the question was the percentage of people that you help versus the percentage of people that can't receive housing. Like, for example, these homes that are going to be built and you can only house X number. Is there something that you can share to let us know what the balance is and what happens to those people? And is it that number getting worse or slightly stable?
So, Commissioner, when we arrived to the 40 units back in June of last year, we focused on those individuals that are experiencing homelessness or street homelessness. Because our numbers are high, but due to vehicular homelessness, we are trying to focus on those individuals that are more visual on the streets. And that's how we arrived to 40 units. We're going to focus on those clients that are in parks, in tents, that are more visual to the community members. And that's the only numbers that I have for you. We don't have any numbers that specify families or anything of that nature. But when we did we brought that item to council, it was based on that, on that fact.
Yeah, I wanted to mention too that the number of units in the shelter or this interim housing, 40 is about the right number, because when people go into this temporary shelter, it is, the word temporary is very, it really is what people are experiencing there. It is, these aren't their forever homes. People don't get stuck in these temporary shelters. They're just there so that we can provide better services for them. It's just more, we have easier access, and there's just a lot of reasons why folks are in shelter. It's a little bit easier to, once they're in shelter, to get them moved into permanent housing. And one of the things that we didn't present, and but Zolma and Vienna are great about presenting to both the City Council as well as the Social Services Commission, is that I believe on a quarterly basis they do report out on just how successful Valerie and others have been in getting people moved off the streets into kind of permanent housing locations. And with the shelter, we'll be able to move people even faster in. But again, people will typically stay in shelter. Every individual is different, but they typically will stay in like 6, 7, 8 months or so. And the reason it's even that long, it's because on the back end, even when people do receive these services, like Valerie, Zolma mentioned a program called Rapid Rehousing, which is a time-limited rental subsidy. Some people may get different housing vouchers, kind of like there's special types of like Section 8 vouchers that you might be familiar with. But even when clients have those in hand, because of the lack of affordable housing units, sometimes it takes like 2 or 3, 4 months or even longer for them to find a unit that they can move into. So kind of on the back end of the system, there's a little bit of a log jam. So people do tend to stay in shelter a little bit longer just because of that. But again, people really do move through shelter pretty on a pretty regular basis. And we have some, Harbor Interfaith also operates the 15-unit pallet shelter that's in Redondo Beach. And I think if you look at some of those statistics, you will see that, again, people go into the shelter, they receive the services, they get, it's called housing ready, they get all the documents prepared and so forth. And then they eventually do move out to permanent housing. So again, people don't get stuck in shelter.
In addition, if I may add, when Valerie works with the client, especially if she has connected that person to some type of permanent housing program, she has to go out in the streets and try to find this individual or her client. Mm-hmm. So that might take a few weeks to find somebody, because they tend to move around, whether it's from park to park or city to city. So having those partnerships with our neighboring cities is very important, because she will call another outreach worker, let's say from Redondo Beach, and see, hey, have you seen my client? And they both communicate, not just Redondo Beach, but all our beach cities. We all partner with them and connect with each other and communicate for the betterment of our clients. So it's a long process, not just trying to get a hold of one client, but at the same time, make sure they have all the documents that they need to fill out an application to obtain permanent housing, whether it's taking that person to the DMV, making sure they stay in line and they pay for an ID. All that is time consuming, and having them in one location will be much more easier for the housing navigation or the housing navigator to process all that information and data to get them permanently housed.
I just wanted to say thank you to both of you for taking the time to present this to us. It's incredibly informative, and your knowledge is impressive, and we are very lucky to have you guys here.
Thank you so much again for the opportunity. And if that concludes any questions commissioners might have, then I guess this concludes our presentation. Thank you once again and have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Zulma and Nancy. We're going to take a brief moment while Cynthia pulls back on our presentation screen. So if you will just hold with us for just a moment. I'm going to stop sharing